We're at the very beginning of the festival, so once I de-stress, everything is going to be fine. I'd like to start by thanking Amanda Mohan and Cormac Leonard, who are ISL interpreters today. Like previous years, we're opening the festival with a conversation. So today is our day of reflection, dialogue, debates, which will be followed tomorrow by a day of party and workshops, performances and exhibitions. So today we have our opening. I suppose the Mother Tongues Festival is the peak of the iceberg, is the moment when we manage to celebrate things that we've been doing over a long period of time throughout the year. And some of our events or some of the things we do are much less visible than the actual festival that gets a lot more press and publicity. This is a very rewarding moment, I think, a very happy moment for us, because also we get to see a lot of the people that gather under one roof. Finally, some people that we have sometimes only met online, we get to see them face to face. We get to see some of the artists that have come to us, proposed their ideas. Some of them have just moved to Ireland. Some of them are just started maybe to make their first steps into their artistic career. And so we're very happy that some of them will be with us for this festival program this year. Our special guests this year are coming from Bologna in Italy. And the company is called Cantieri Meticci, which means a workshop where you mix, more or less. So they tend to work with people who come from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds, especially at borders where people have been forced to migrate from, usually from war zones. So their work so far with us has been in our local area here with a primary and a secondary school. And tomorrow you'll be able to see the exhibition of the children's work, and it will be a bit of a surprise. It will be in Rua Red tomorrow. The presence of a company such as Cantieri Meticci for us is a first indication of the fact that we're really keen to make our work visible, not only nationally, but also internationally. Not only because we have big ambitions, but because what we want to promote is a message about the importance of linguistic and cultural diversity. And what we try, and we hope you will join us throughout the festival, is to create spaces, environments where a few people will go outside of their immediate comfort zone. So we'll try maybe a new language, or we'll try to sit somewhere where maybe they don't understand everything. And people means everyone, including the artists, because we have had moments where we had to explain, this is going to work, you have to trust us. But at the very, very beginning, I trusted the children more than anyone else, I suppose. I thought, children will get this. And once the children get it, they will bring their adults with them, and then we'll be fine. And that's how it worked. So through the festival, the Language Explorers, we create these spaces where we produce workshops or shows or events that are either bilingual, so there's English and another language, some trilingual as well with 3 languages, or they're completely immersive, so they're led in a language that we don't have in common necessarily. And the idea is to just walk in and either hear a language you know very well, that maybe you only hear in the home environment, or just throw yourself into the unknown and see what happens. And children are quite good at doing those kind of things, at just seeing what happens. So the festival program is here. I hope you have a copy. This is a teensy tiny copy, and on our website you have full details. Also on our website we put information about who the artists are and sometimes links to their work, because we know that it's a good platform for artists who may be new to the Irish art scene to be more visible. There are many highlights, and I don't want to bore you with every single list. As you can see, we pack a lot in 2 days, especially tomorrow, because we want everyone to come together and to be in the same space and to have that feeling of being at a busy festival. And a lot of people come without a ticket, which is not what we recommend, but anyway. But they say, what can I go to now? And we might recommend to go to the Brazilian Carnival. And then after that, there might be an art exhibition. Say, try this, try that. And so some people come with a very clear map of what they want to do for the day. Some people come to see if they can try something different. And I'm very happy that they bring their family along. So it's a very joyous and very family-oriented kind of event. So I suppose I'm speaking a lot about joy, even though every time we have this speech, there's a war going on, and there are situations that we are aware of, and we are probably not directly involved in the war zone, but we're meeting children in schools, in early childhood settings, in community environments whose lives have been devastated by various wars around the world, some known better than others. So our festival wants to bring a message of peace, because coming together across our differences, linguistic, cultural differences, we hope is a message that is received by everyone as a message of peace. And these environments, as you might see tomorrow, are quite joyful because children are there. And children are happy to share their work, to show it. You'll see it even in the exhibition of family stories. There'll be grandparents with their grandchildren. At the Cantieri Meticci exhibition, there'll be children who have been invited to bring as many family members, and they're really, really proud to share their work, to tell their stories. And some of those stories are very difficult to listen to, but they are the true identity of who the children are, what the children are going through. And so we are very interested in opening this dialogue about our identity being something that doesn't need to be fully defined, because we're evolving, our children are evolving through different languages, cultures, and Ireland is evolving and being a more and more multilingual society. And the census tells us this. Walk into any classroom, and you don't need me to tell you this. So our journey started 7 years ago, and this includes obviously running festival over 7 years and running other programs that I'll tell you about in a moment. And one of the, I suppose, questions we address is how can we all come together in this shared space if we're so different from each other? And if our stories are so different from each other, how can we find to become more interested in each other, even though we don't know that much about each other? And in over the years, thanks to the entire team of Mother Tongues, who are now behind the camera, so happily behind the camera. So I have to say, they leave me here on my own all the time to do all the speaking, but I'm only, again, the tip of the iceberg, because we have Elena Cristofanon, who runs all the thinking and organizing and making sure everything is fitting into place, listening to me, coming up with strange ideas and organizing them in such a way that the world can see them as well, which is fundamental. And we have today also Hannah, who is our family liaison and community engagement where's Anna? She's here floating around. And Tatiana Santos, who runs our intercultural programs. Suzanne McCarthy, in our education capacity. So it is a small drop in the ocean, but we're getting bigger, and we're trying to have more and more impact on our local communities and hopefully on Ireland. And one of the messages that we tend to repeat over time, especially to families, concerns the importance of holding on to your mother tongue. And that's why our festival happens around International Mother Language Day. It usually happens in and around the weekend, the closest weekend to the 21st of February, which is UNESCO International Mother Language Day. And we were created to promote multilingualism and to support families who want to pass on their language to their children. And the Language Explorers program is probably the family program that we have been working the most on. And we've involved hundreds, and Elena now, if she was here, she would tell me the exact numbers of children and parents and grandparents who've been involved. And we continually create new workshops. We train new artists every year. So we have developed this program, also thanks to funding from the Arts Council, whereby we support artists in delivering multilingual workshops using their own art form, no matter what that might be, and supporting families, encouraging families in using their language while they're in that workshop. So you can imagine that there could be a group here in Tala Library, and they're 3-4-year-olds. They could be speaking 7 different languages, and each one of the children, actually sometimes we do them in this very room, and the children with their parents or anybody who's with them, they speak their own language, and then they might perform, they might do a puppet show, they might have a presentation of their work, which they can present, if they want to, in the language that their parents use with them. Again, for some, this is quite shocking. For some children, it's the first time that they feel that they're allowed to use a language that is usually inside the home in a place that is a public library or a public space. And children do look at you a bit like, what are you asking me to do? You know, the parents are there, of course, but for so many of them, it's difficult at the beginning to believe that they can do it, because the language of the home has always been in the home, or just me and my mother. And here I can stand in front of everybody and speak a language that I know that no one in this room might understand, but they're looking at me, they're listening to me, and they're praising me and my adult, because we have something special, which is a gift that we're sharing with everybody. And for a long time, there was, as we were developing this program, there were more people who were raising their children bilingually than there are now, because now we're getting more and more people who are not raising their children bilingually, but they want their children to be in an environment that they wouldn't be getting anywhere else unless they were on Erasmus on an international program of some sort, because the children are really immersed in, surprisingly, I don't know how many languages, because each time you don't know what you're going to hear. So as I said, we are currently training 3 more artists from 3 different language backgrounds. They are our role models. We collect a lot of data, so I was just last week reading through what the parents said, what the artists said, and many of the parents also get a shock when they realize that their children suddenly want to speak more of their language, even though they might have been with us for 1 or 2 hours. Some of the children share the language of the artist, and those moments are magical, because they're like, there's a teacher there, because it's seen as a teacher, the facilitator somehow, and this facilitator is always more fun than your parents suddenly, because they're doing crafts and doing music, they're dancing, they have a lot of colored paper that maybe you don't have at home, and they speak the same language as your family. And that usually is a wow moment also for the artists, who then kind of click and they see why we're doing what we're doing. So I think, as I said, the festival today and tomorrow will show you a glimpse into the kinds of pieces of work that we do throughout the year, and I hope you'll be able to enjoy it as much as possible and to see as much as possible. And this is also a call for you, and I don't know everyone in the room, and I don't know anyone who's on the other side of the web, to really get in touch, send an email, think about a project and suggest ideas. There's always people that we've failed to include for one reason or another. There's always more than we can do. So we're always thinking, and I know Elena might look at me and say, are you really thinking of new stuff? Yes, always trying to do better, to include more ideas, especially in the festival moments where we can really think big. And I'm really happy that we were able to have a company with us for 2 weeks, coming from a very different background, to also understand our reality and for us to understand their reality better. And I also wanted to say that we're a small team, and we always want to, and we have been trying to collaborate as much as possible with others, whether they work in the field of early childhood education or the arts, or language, obviously, because on our own we just couldn't do it. And so every time something has worked out, like Language Explorers, there have been more than just 4 people believing in the project. And this goes from the directors of Ruhr Red and the Civic Theatre, who said, yes, you can have our spaces, do whatever you want, which at the beginning I was like, really? Let's have big parties. And we are still going, and it's a really great collaboration we have. And we have a home that we can rely on every year, which is not something we take for granted. The South Dublin Arts Office and the Arts Council have believed in our ideas that were different, I suppose, something that I had never seen before. Even the festival, when I first applied for funding, I thought, who is going to think that this is a good idea? And then when you see that there's people who trust you, then you also can keep going, and you can then pass on the message. And that's what we do with artists as well. We say, if you want to do something that you think hasn't been done before, because maybe it's something that would work really well in Germany, but you don't think might work here, let's try it and let's see what happens. So it's the belief that collaboration works, and that people are, and our partners and our many friends have supported us, that also keeps us going. And that's why today I wanted to present 3 collaborative projects, so that I can stop talking. Just to give you also a sense of the range of things that we do. You will see more of our artistic projects tomorrow and today. So I wanted to talk about the flyer that you have on your chairs, which I will grab here. This is a collaboration between Mother Tongues and the Free University of Brussels. And it's a research project where we are gathering data from families with children between the ages of 0, so just born, and 3, to find out what are their challenges, what are the messages the families are getting about raising bilingual children, what are the supports they need. Because once we'll get this data, we'll be able to also better support families, whether that's through Language Explorers or other services that families might be interested in. So we're collaborating with the University of Brussels because they run this exact same study in the Flanders. So we have a benchmark, we have some other data sets that we can look at, and we're really interested in sending this survey out to the whole island. And so I hope you'll be able to help us to spread the message. We'll be obviously sending more information about it, But to us, it's very, very important, especially because that's a very beginning stage of parenting. And that's where we find that a lot of parents have many, many doubts, and they're receiving a lot of advice, but sometimes they don't know how to navigate that advice. The other project that I wanted to introduce was a project that we did with Early Childhood Ireland, and I have Christina Egan Marnell, who is going to tell you a little bit about it. And after Christina, Juan Ruiz is going to tell us about the BABO project. Juan Ruiz is from Baby Erasmus. So I wanted to introduce you to our partners as well. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Christina and I work at Early Childhood Ireland, and we have over the past several years partnered together with Mother Tongues for some really exciting projects. And I guess I want to reiterate some of the messages that Francesca was saying, in that a child's home language is at the heart of their emerging identity. And what we can do in the early years sector, but also across our communities, is so important in helping children find that and experience that sense of belonging, so that their emerging sense of identity is strong and that they are confident in who they are, but also with their home language as well. That is such an important part of it. So I'll tell you about our first project, and hopefully a moment to tell you about our most recent one. So in 2022, we partnered together to develop a project called Our World of Languages, or OWL for short. So it was a small-scale evidence and arts-based storytelling project that was piloted in 2 very culturally and linguistically diverse services in Dublin. We wanted to support services on their journey with multilingualism. And where we started from was acknowledging that multilingualism is very much the norm in Ireland. And how we go about embracing that is really important in the earlier sector as well. Some of our motivations came from when we spoke to educators and we asked them, what happens for you and how do you promote multilingualism? Sometimes their first reaction can be fear. A fear that they don't know where to start. Sometimes it comes from not knowing their families as well as they would like to, but also that they hear myths around multilingualism. Things like, if you encourage more than one language with a child, it will affect their language development. Or that you should only use English because that means treating everyone equally. These are the sort of myths that can lead to fear and create barriers for educators. So in exploring our project with the help of a fantastic artist, we developed different activities that were based around storytelling and an expression of the arts. So children were invited to create their own stories or express their own stories through puppets, but also through creating a story box that went home and could come back into the service. So asking parents for their ideas and inviting them to engage as well. From an educator's perspective, we learned that one of the first things that has to happen is you have to reflect on your own biases. Where are your values, where are your biases coming from, and how do they impact on how you feel about multilingualism? You don't have to be a language expert to promote multilingualism in a service with children. It is just about the positive attitude that you take with you. So what we looked at was how we could promote a linguistically responsive pedagogy. And that just came down to looking at how the diverse languages that were already existing can be promoted and how you can encourage that in different ways. So I thought I would just share with you a couple of the big things that came out of this project and how that led us on to our next one together. So many of the settings across Ireland, but ones that were reflected in our project, have sometimes significant untapped funds of knowledge already there. So we can see that educators themselves, families and children have these vast linguistic resources. They're so competent and capable. And as educators, it's our place to invite them to share their home languages with us, to teach us how we can use those languages on a daily basis, that English doesn't have to be the only language that's used. Also that came about from the project was the real importance of partnerships, which involves everyone working together to benefit children's learning and development. We wanted multilingual parents to know that their home language was valued and that we always wanted to invite it to be celebrated. And that the project showed us that parents felt more welcome in the setting after they experienced their languages and cultures being recognised and valued. And we know what an impact that could have in the wider community, because if a parent felt valued, that message was spread to their children and their wider community. We also seen, as always, the power of play with children. In creating opportunities for children to be creative through their play, they were able to express themselves and their identities in lots of different ways. And this meant verbally and non-verbally for a lot of children. We've seen how a child-led approach to creativity fostered divergent thinking and avoided tokenism, which allowed children to develop an appreciation of different languages and cultures. We also learned that to create a language-rich environment, you do not need to be a language expert. Opening up to many languages doesn't mean you need to know them all. Educators themselves have great linguistic resources, as does the children and the families present. Families were not expecting educators to be experts, but they really did appreciate any effort that was made. We use storytelling as part of our arts-based approach. And storytelling can support children in expressing how they perceive their own identities, but it also helps them in constructing their own narrative. In our OWL project, the artist told her own story of moving to Ireland, missing her family but making new friends and a new life in her new country. This personal story was chosen so that children could feel safe and comfortable in sharing their own story. What the educators found was that after children told their own stories, they began to develop a stronger relationship with the children and the families because they learned more about them. When we reflected on the OWL project, there was a huge amount of learning that came out of it for both us at Early Childhood Ireland and for Mother Tongues. And what we wanted was to find a way to share that learning. So we did. We created a provocation pack for the early year sector, and that's still available online for free that can be downloaded. But what we talked about was the basis of the project, but also practical strategies that can be used in your everyday lives, in home, but also in services to encourage linguistic diversity with families. And finally, one of the big things that came out of the project for us all together was looking at the terminology that we used and was thinking about how the term plurilingual probably represents more how we feel about language diversity and wanting to encourage that inclusive connection between communities when you have different languages. So from our OWL project, we partnered again and we created a new project last year called Owlet. And this project is centred around working with 1 to 2-year-old children, because often they're forgotten about in projects that look at multilingualism. So this project is centred around lullabies, and we were really excited to welcome 10 different singers who sang lullabies in their home language. And these recordings were then used to develop a board book for 1 to 2-year-old age children. And we also have an e-learning program. So these will all be becoming available later this year. But it was another important message to reflect on how younger children, infants, have the power to learn many languages, and we need to encourage the capacity that they have for languages in supporting families to know that their mother tongue, that their home language is so important. That's me. Thank you.
Okay, hi. My name is Juan Ruiz, as Francesca said, and I come from Spain. We are from Baby Erasmus. Baby Erasmus is an English-speaking nursery school in Spain, in Badajoz. And we have to say thank you to Francesca and to Mother Tongues for promoting multilingualism, because it's something that we saw, my wife and me, when we were living in Brussels. We were still not married. And we saw that all our friends, they have children and they were speaking in the parks like 3-4 languages easily. So later on, when we came back to Spain, we decided that we wanted our children to be bilingual or multilingual in the way that the children in Brussels, they were. So we started learning about multilingualism and how the things were going. And we opened Baby Erasmus. Baby Erasmus is, the name is because we since the children, they cross the door, the only language that they listen is English. We work with native speakers, and we don't teach English indeed, we just work with the English language. But our educative program with children from 0 to 6 years is just playing activities, outdoor activities, games, all that kind of things. So at the beginning we were a little bit worried because it is in Spain. Everybody is speaking Spanish around, and the only English that they listened is in the class. So we were a little bit scared about it's gonna work, it's not gonna work. It's unbelievable, as Francesca was saying, the capacities that the children they have when they are especially from 0 to 3 years, because they don't have only the capacity to learn the second language, but to pronounce, to reproduce the phonics in the same way that the teachers they speak the language. So 15 years later, we are very proud of our children. All of them, they are bilingual, and they speak English between them in the school, with the parents, with the children, everything. Once they cross the door, they understand that it's another language, and they speak that language. And as Christina was saying, the earliest, the better. So it's not only to 1 to 2, if they can start when they are 6 months or 3 months or 2 months, because we can see the difference when the children, they start in the school, when they are 6 months. When they finish, something happens at that age, but the capacity or the second language, the way that they talk, is even better than the children they were starting when they were 2 years old. Okay, so that's Baby Erasmus, and now we are going to talk about BABO. BABO is a project that we are working on with mother tongues. We are 9 partners from Austria, Belgium, Ireland, Spain, and Portugal, with different profiles. And what we wanted to do is, as Christina said, when you tell to the teachers, okay, we are going to offer bilingual education, the first thing that they feel is like fear, like, how can I do it? Do I have resources? Do I have something? So we wanted to create resources for the teachers and also for the parents for promoting that second language in the school, but as well at home. So the first thing that we have 4 project results in the project. This is an Erasmus Plus project, so we got the funds from the European Commission, and all the results are open educational resources, so they will be available for everybody and for free. And the first project result is a guide of activities for promoting that second language, and we are using the multiple intelligences theory because what we realize is that all the children, they can learn the same language, but they have like different motivations. Some of them, they prefer to learn doing activities of sports. Some of them, they prefer to do arts and crafts. Some of them, they prefer to do it with music. So we want to offer different activities depending on the needs of the children. The second project result are these games that we have here that are normal games for playing, but we always have a motivation for teaching some vocabulary. So it's not that we are going to play. We are going to play, but with the idea of teaching you some vocabulary. The third one are Babo the Dragon, the cartoons, educational cartoons. They are like 3 minutes each episode, and it's connected with the games. Each game is connected with one of the episodes, and it's connected as well with the activities, the multiple intelligences activities that we are offering, because one of the important thing for the children for learning a second language is repetition. You have to tell them maybe a word 20 times for them to pick it up. Or some of them, if they're interested, if they like playing football, maybe the word ball, they will learn it the first time. But some other words that they are not that interested, if you repeat them, the words, they will pick it up. So that's what we try to do. Everything is connected for offering them month by month the same words in different ways for learn to learn that vocabulary. And the last project result is an application game as well, because it's important, as Christina was saying again, that the children, they feel that the second language they are learning, it's valued. It's not only in the school, but at home as well. Indeed, we have a lot of resources. We work with flipped classroom activities. And like that, the children, they can go home and they will see that in their families, that second language is valued as well. The parents, they support the learning of that second language. So they feel proud about the second language as well. So that's why this application game as well can be used at home, and the parents can play with the children, even if they don't speak any English. In this case, because we are talking, sorry, about English. These resources will be available in Spanish and English. At the beginning, later on, we will try to offer them in more languages. I hope one day in Irish as well. And well, the good thing is that partners like Mother Tongues, that they promote this kind of multilingualism, they are helping us, because now we are in that stage that we are testing all the results. So Mother Tongues now is working with some settings here, and now we are receiving all the reports about the activities, for example, of multiple intelligences, if they are good for the children, if they are too long, if it's hard for them, or it should be instead of for 2-3 years, for 3-4 years. So all that knowledge that we are receiving now will allow us to improve these projects results and to offer better quality projects for the teachers and for the families who are interested in teaching a second language. And that's something more or less what I want to say. Sorry about my English, because it's not the best. Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you. So visitors from Spain, Italy, this year we're super international. Okay, and I want to say as well, we always, when we played this game back in Brussels a couple of weeks ago, and Irish was on my mind all the time, because there's no language on the actual game. You could play any language. You could play your home language using those games. So they're fantastic, a fantastic resource that can be printed, reused by teachers. So again, ideas flow. So we are on time. What is planned for the next while is a workshop led by Miriam Stewart. For that, those who are following online won't be able to attend the workshop, so please come back in about at 3 p.m. And for the others who are in the room, we're moving to the other side of the room. After the workshop, we'll have a panel discussion organized in collaboration with the School of Education in Trinity College, led by Dr. Erika Piazzoli, who will then guide us through everything else. So I said I'd just stop here, and I hope you can stay on for the rest of the day. We have a film at 5 p.m. called Il Cerchio, which I watched in an Italian cinema, cried my eyes out, and I said I want this movie at the festival. And it's the first time I see a documentary where there's no adults. You only see children talk and tell you how they feel. And it follows the lives of children over their entire primary school cycle. So you see them grow up, and you see them become more and more disillusioned sometimes, but you kind of see their life happenings, and they're very incredibly open. And it's in Italian with English subtitles. And that will be followed tonight by a talk on bilingual parenting in the Civic Theatre. Am I correct? Okay, so thank you for coming today on behalf of all the Mother Tongues team as well.
Good afternoon, everyone, and you're all very welcome to today's panel on multilingualism and creativity. My name is Erika Piazzoli. I'm from the School of Education, Trinity College, Dublin, and I would like to formally thank Francesca La Morgia and the wonderful crew at the Mother Tongues for inviting the School of Education, Trinity College, Dublin, to organize this panel. We would also like to formally, officially thank the Arts Council for funding this wonderful event. So today we're going to talk about something that is of great value to us and to me, and obviously everybody who is in this room loves and values this topic. So creativity, multilingualism, and what it means in practice for us as who we are here in Ireland, in this room, in Dublin, in Europe, and also in the world. So I'm here to moderate this panel. First thing I'll do is I'll introduce you to our wonderful speakers today. So we'll start off with Iseult Ní Chonchúir, who is our teaching fellow at the School of Education, and she's working on the Master in Education for the Irish language. We then have Dr. Claire Dunne from the Marino Institute of Education. Claire is the head of drama and in English and Irish department.
Head of drama, though I like drama.
Head of drama, English and Irish. So you're like 3 heads.
Just two. I have
2 heads.
I'm not in drama, not officially. No.
Okay, so she's unofficially and renowned, esteemed colleague in drama, but officially English and Irish. You're very welcome, Claire. Then we have Dr. Edel Fahy, assistant professor from Maynooth University. You're very welcome, Edel. And we then also have Professor Jean-Rémi Lapaire from Université Bordeaux-Montaigne, who is a professor in sociolinguistics and gesture studies. So you're all very welcome in today's panel. I have written the questions down. Is that bad? I'm going to read out the first one. The first one is a provocation, let's say. Let's start off with the relationship between creativity and multilingualism. Do you think there is a relationship? And how do you see that taking shape in your practice? And when I say practice, which is a huge word, I mean arts practice, teaching practice, and or drama practice, research practice as well, whatever it is that makes sense to you as the word practice. Thank you. Would like to start? I will pass you the microphone.
I'll start. Yeah, I'll go.
Negotiating with glass, so just coming around at the back. Thank you, Iseult.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to speak about, I suppose, my experience as a post-primary teacher working in an immersion school, an all-Irish school in Ireland. And I think creativity is absolutely vital, you know, when teaching languages. And there's so much opportunity. Really, when you're teaching a language, you can use loads of different forms to, you know, get your message across and get the kids interested and motivated. Some of the things that I would have done would have been thinking, I suppose, about assessment. So like, what is the purpose of my assessment? If they're giving a summary of a poem or a story, do they really need to write it, or can they draw it, or can they act it out, or can they write a song? Can they use music? I think with the new junior cycle has been absolutely brilliant in kind of just opening up the world of possibilities. In Ireland, there has been the junior cert that was previously there is now changed to the new junior cycle, and you know, music is included, as songs are included as are pieces that you can actually study, you know, and write about in your and perform and things like that in the exam. So that's great. Yeah, I think creativity is absolutely vital, and I think there's loads of opportunity, and we're kind of only scratching the surface. But yeah, if anybody else would like to continue, or yeah, Gurmagat.
I'm working, I suppose, in a similar enough context in that I'm working with the Irish language for people in English medium schools and Irish medium schools. And I would see just like that there's a huge connection between creativity and multilingualism. There's risk taking really involved in both, whether it's putting pen to paper and sharing your work, or it's embodying a story down there, or you're in a language class and trying to express yourself through an additional language. There's risk taking there, and that leaves you open to feedback, maybe exposed to criticism at times, and that's the vulnerable space that you move into. But it's a very humbling thing to realise that maybe you're not as funny or as articulate in another space, in another language. And all of those kind of considerations, sensitives, are so important for living in a multilingual world, to understand that we're all coming at it from different perspectives. And I think it's the ability to tap into different parts of your identity that is at the heart of creativity and at the heart of really good language teaching, and offering safe spaces for that through the arts.
Yes, and I kind of work in a similar vein as well. So I kind of teach across the arts, so music, visual arts and drama. And again, we're training teachers to go on and work in primary schools. So it's a very creative space that we're working in all the time. And I have a strong, and I actually realised that when we were doing that little activity, I realised that I do absolutely have a very strong and deep love for the Irish language. So I would try and engage the students in as much as possible in lots of different activities, through music, through drama. And again, I'd hope that my enthusiasm and my passion for the language would come through when we're teaching these subjects, because we would try and teach them in Frebel, where I'm working in the department. We'd try and teach them side by side so that they're going to use them in the classroom. So we're breathing life into a language that sometimes can be controversially, maybe not as used as much as it can as well. So for example, in music, we would engage the students in song singing, listening, responding to pieces of music through dance, through visual arts. Then in drama, they would engage in, I suppose, still imaging. They would do narrative mime, which is fantastic, especially if they don't have Irish as their first language as well. And the students really love this, and they find it really fun and really engaging. And I think if they're having a positive experience, they're much more likely to bring it back into their classrooms and use Irish as a living language, because I think the arts really breathe life into the language as well. So I think creativity and multilingualism go hand in hand. One begets the other, really. Okay.
Well, I have a rather limited experience of creativity and multilingualism as such, but quite some experience connecting creativity and language teaching in particular. Later on, I'll talk about a very, very special case of using drama-based techniques and other approaches, in the French Guiana, and a very strange experience there. But with my, let's say, regular students in Bordeaux, in France, what I often do in rather creatively, I no longer use term papers or essays. All my students have little scrapbooks and diaries that they keep, because it's a learning experience and it's a personal experience, and the diary is like a personal space to, record that personal experience. That's one thing. When you mentioned assessment, that's how I assess their work. Also usually after each seminar we do either a dance or a performance where we recapitulate the key notions, key words, key moments of the class. We allow for like 10 to 15 minutes to do that particular recapitulation. And that is very unusual when you teach a master's seminar in morphology, syntax, or pragmatics. And finally, when I teach other courses like English for drama students, I always surprise them when I say, for instance, today there will be no English spoken. It will be, reading physical. We'll read a poem, but you will show your understanding with a tableau vivant, like a composition, like a human, living sculpture, and that will be the way you show us what you actually understood. And that is being very creative and, let's say, unusual in the way we handle, I would say, the language teaching and language learning experience.
Thank you. So, Claire, you touched on vulnerability, and I'm really intrigued by the construct of vulnerability and its relationship to creativity. So, just throwing this little question out there for the panel, what do you think is the relationship between vulnerability, risk-taking, creativity, and multilingualism? Anybody that wants to get started?
I'm no Brene Brown. I think she would be the person to look at for vulnerability, but really what she says is quite similar to these things. I mentioned risk-taking, and all of us, I suppose, and probably everyone in the room has experience of trying to communicate in another language, in another space, and all of that can be a bit disconcerting, a little bit uncomfortable at times, but I think the creative thing is about stepping in or leaning into that kind of a space and seeing what it brings out in yourself, and the creative pursuit is in understanding that all of those kinds of facets are part of you, actually, and you can learn more about yourself by reading, by speaking in another language, by engaging with other language communities. That would be my thoughts. Yeah. Iseult.
Thank you. Gurmagat. Just kind of when you mentioned vulnerability and things like that, I was thinking of my first experience on teaching practice. So I was put into school and I had amazing mentors, and I was observing a choir class, and I don't know, has anybody ever tried to get teenagers to sing? But it can be quite difficult, you know, they might be self-conscious, you might be self-conscious. I'm a musician myself and I'd be very confident in my singing, but when I went out teaching initially, I was very nervous. And I observed this class where a teacher, Tomaso Durhila, how he got the kids to sing was he would put on a YouTube video and they would kind of do like karaoke. And this was a great way of kind of breaking down the borders of, you know, there was the music on behind them, so they weren't put on the spot and things like that with music. So I think like with vulnerability, there are kind of steps and supports that we can put in place and kind of share with each other, or different tips and tricks that we could share with teachers and students and educators and things like that, just to get them, you know, involved and have that support in place for people. So. Yeah, I'm not sure if I went off on a tangent there, but you know, the karaoke was great. I'd highly recommend.
Yeah, and I think as well, just did a little bit of reading about multilingualism, because again, this is a whole new area for me as well. And it talked about how it nurtured interpersonal skills and developing that communication. I think Goethe 2003 said that. And I think this is so true when you're working in the arts. You know, you really have to let down your barriers. You have to let people in, you know, for it to be a true aesthetic experience, for you to really engage. And I think we find that sometimes hard as a teacher. And then, as you were saying about the teenagers, I'm sure they definitely find that hard, and even working with younger children. So I think you let down your barriers, you relax a little bit, and you leave yourself open and you're vulnerable. And I think that's our job then as a teacher. That's where you come in, both as a teacher and a teacher educator. You have to provide, I think, the scaffolds or the supports, and you have to lead them through that process. And we have a lovely saying, Frebel, I'm sure you know Frebel very well. He talks about going and starting from where the child is at. But even you as a teacher, I think we have to start where the teacher is at and go from the known to the unknown. Dorothy Heathcote, when the process drama, I love that. And through that, I suppose, we can lead them to the unknown. And I think once you tap into that, you have that eureka moment. And it doesn't always happen, but I think that safe environment really comes back to you, the teacher, that you really have to create that. And once you have that, once you have the children in the palm of your hand, they really will do anything from you. So that vulnerability is there, but I think you need to have it, because otherwise the drama, the music, the visual art, it won't be true. That aesthetic process that Maxine Greene talks about, igniting the spark, it won't be true. So, yeah.
I think it's also a very good experience for teachers themselves, maybe to travel to other countries and meet with students that are exposed to different teaching styles. Recently, that was last December, I traveled to French Guyana, to an border area. There's Brazil, and there's a border between French Guyana and Brazil, and that is the river Oyapoque. And I went there as an academic, but I had prepared all sorts of drama-based activities. I will mention some of them later. But what struck me there suddenly is that I found myself, officially it was a French school, because it's France runs the place, but only 10% of the students, I would say, were of European stock. Their parents probably were engineers or doctors sent there, but the vast majority, I would say 50%, were Brazilian pupils. Their families had crossed the river and settled in French Guyana, and about 40% were Amerindians. And what struck me instantly is that they behaved completely differently. When they, Gumperz used this phrase of human aggregates. They just stick together all the time, the Brazilians and the Amerindians, where they cycle together. You have 2, 3, the brothers, the sisters, they all get on the same bike with their, sun umbrellas. And the Amerindian girls, for instance, I'm here talking about the ones who were under 14. Many of them will sit very close together and hold hands in class as they listen to you. And you talk to them, and they will look away, because until you're 14, you mustn't look an adult, straight into the eyes. And you give them an instruction, very simple, we could get up, just do this. I thought it was very simple, and they simply do not respond because you have the wrong communicative style. So interestingly, my colleagues did this on purpose, not to tell me anything, so that I would discover, the differences. So I found out that you have to kind of whisper the instructions and speak in a very low voice, and then suddenly they react and they do the things you ask them to do. So that was, to me, really unsettling in the first place. But they were themselves a little unsettled by, the way, for instance, some of the exercises I was asking them to do. And they could not, for instance, spread themselves out. They had to always, again, be together. And also, they would always check that the others agreed with what I had asked them to do. So these are like different things. And kind of challenges. And to me, it made me really vulnerable in suddenly, my self-assurance, my methods. And to them, they did the activities in the end. And some of them, I will discuss this later, found that a lot of them experienced, I'll explain why, language insecurity for a number of cultural and sadly colonial reasons. And I'll explain to you later what, being an Amerindian, for instance, might feel like when in a Portuguese and French speaking environment, when those are the dominant languages over there, not the Amerindian languages. And that affects, of course, language teaching and English teaching in particular.
Thank you. So yeah, Claire, you mentioned Brené Brown. Just for the audience, a quick word. So Brené Brown's research is on shame, and then from shame she went on, an American professor, to research vulnerability. And it's interesting now, Brené doesn't really openly address language and multilingualism, but I think we could all agree that there is a fair deal of shame attached to sometimes to operating in multilingual environments, and the sometimes strict policies related to the languages that you can speak at home and then go out there and speak, in the common, for example, even the playground, for example. And every family operates around those. But shame is always with us, and we cannot not experience it, of course, otherwise we would be sociopaths. But we need to navigate it as teachers, as educators, as citizens, as humans. So vulnerability then, if you flip the coin and if you see it as a strength in a multilingual sense, unites us, because we all have an accent, because we're all not fluent in a language. And if children are allowed to then to have those vulnerabilities, then who knows, what if we thrive in those vulnerabilities, which kind of connects to what Francesca was saying at the beginning in your opening speech as well. So thinking now of children and their environments, to what extent do you think that multilingual environments around children, so at school or at home or social media as well, which is huge, influence the way that children express themselves creatively? And I should say that if you're probably burning with a question or with a comment after, in a little while we'll open the floor, so we'd love to hear your points as well, because I'm sure each one of you would have a different take on these issues.
I think, I suppose, the extent to which you're exposed to different languages will, feed into how much you can express yourself in those languages. Like, we live in a country where there are 200 languages spoken, 3 indigenous languages. But if children don't have access to the arts in those languages, to creative practices in those languages, like we both, and you, Adele, too, work with the Irish language, a minoritized language. So teenagers, even primary school children don't have as many opportunities to engage with the language outside the school walls. Now, that's not to say that schools aren't creative places. They are creative places and spaces. But when children and young people don't have access to books in Irish, they don't know who are the writers in Irish, don't know who are the illustrators in Irish, they don't have the creative role models in that target language group. And I think that would be similar for people who have moved to Ireland, have a different language community in another country. If you don't have those opportunities to engage with those kinds of languages, you're missing out on tapping into that part of your creative self. So I think it's it's an unharnessed, if you like, resource that we have, the 200 languages, but not everybody engages with them on a day-to-day basis.
Claire. Yeah, I think with Irish as well, there are great things happening in Ireland with the Irish language at the moment outside of the school. But I guess it's just to encourage more people, to try things like there's na Gaeilge, which is an Irish language football club based in Dublin. And I mean, that really is fabulous. If you haven't checked it out, do. They just do wonderful things. They have sports for boys and girls across all ages where kids come together and they learn to play football and camogie and hurling and all these things through the medium of the Irish language. I know there's Oga Yoga, that does yoga through Irish, and we have amazing writers and musicians all around the country. And then just looking at teenagers and things, there's loads of opportunities, I guess, with social media, and you can have WhatsApp in Irish, and you can have all these things, Gmail, and so I guess it's just having the opportunity to engage with that, and as Claire said, creating as many environments outside of the classroom that people can engage, not just kids, adults as well, that can engage with the language. So.
And just going from that as well, I think that, again, from the teacher point of view, I think that every language that you teach is a language lesson. So every environment that you're in is a language opportunity for you to engage in. And I suppose the one that's I'm most prevalent with at the moment is working with schools, working with class teachers, working with student teachers. And I think probably the biggest drawback that I see happening is that teachers don't have the skills. So obviously English is there all the time, but we, as we know, Ireland is a changing demographic in Ireland. We have lots of different children from lots of different backgrounds. We have our own language as well. And I don't feel that teachers are still equipped enough to deal with all these different languages, all these different cultures that are coming in. And that does play then on teachers' confidence. And I think if the teacher is not confident in working with those children and working with those individuals from lots of different places, I don't think they can bring the best out of the children. They can't be the guide on the side. They can't facilitate the creative process in the way that they can. So I think maybe more supports to be put in place to help schools to be those environments where children can really excel in their own language and Irish language as well, from that point of view as well. Yeah.
Something very meaningful, important was said earlier on in the general introduction about, the inside versus outside distinction in terms of language. There are certain languages you speak at home and others you speak, when you're in school. And I think that is something we should not underestimate, that often there is a reluctant for a child who speaks a particular language at home, as you said very rightly this morning, suddenly to go public about that language, because it's almost like a private. You have this also in regular countries where you have dialetto, which you speak with your friends or at home, and which you might not want to use elsewhere on other occasions. So we have to be very careful as teachers, because we think, all languages are beautiful, and I'm a linguist, so I absolutely love the sound of all sorts of languages, but the meaning of that language to a particular speaker might be different. I have this aesthetic and general loving of languages, but to them it's maybe something very special, very personal. And I found this again when I was in French Guyana. I was expecting we did I tried to have multilingual performances in English, in French, Portuguese, and the Brazilians would sometimes contribute some Portuguese, but the Amerindians, for instance, never spoke a word of their Amerindian languages, even when I was giving prompts, and it was beautiful with simple things like darkness, life, sound, words that I thought were poetic, wonderful in English and sounded great in Portuguese, and then nothing. And I soon found out that to them that wasn't really the place or the occasion for them just to use the language they use with, because most of them lived 3 or 4 days away, by pirogue or, motor launch. So, they really came from afar. And so that was another world, another language. And, clearly, we they couldn't use it. So that was something I found challenging as well, wanting it to kind of come out and the language not coming out at all.
So on one end of the spectrum, we have this reality. Some languages are spoken in one area and others are spoken in another. And there may be very, very well a cultural reason for this and social norms. On the other end of the spectrum, Then you have translanguaging as a practice, which is a word that has been used a lot in the last probably 20 years, in the last 10 years even so, and it has ceased to be a buzzword almost. It has become a word that we are very familiar with, but perhaps it has almost lost its meaning because we've overheard it. So how do we understand translanguaging? Why is it relevant to our society? And how can we make sure that translanguaging moves away on the shame continuum, from shame to a place where it can be valued? Small question, tiny little question about translanguaging, but I think it's an important one because, Edel, you were saying, you know, we need supports, and we do, and this is why we're here, you know, and this is what Mother Tongues does. So we really need to look at the elephant in the room. Is translanguaging something that makes us feel embarrassed? And Jean-Rémi, you may briefly mention embarrassment studies as well that you were talking. So there, but so translanguaging and shame, or translanguaging as celebration of culture. So where do we sit at the moment, and what are your thoughts?
You're right. Translanguaging is a word that comes up an awful lot in curriculum design, and some people take it to mean what code switching used to. And there is an academic or philosophical debate about whether you think we have one language and you use it in different ways in different contexts. And I think simultaneous bilinguals, people who've been brought up with 2 or more languages, probably identify with that, where at the dinner table you needed to ask in one language to get the salt, and you needed to use another way of speaking to communicate with another relative. The second version, and probably the one I relate to more as someone who learned the target language, is that you have more than one language and you use input from one language to do something else in another language. So that's not simply translation, that's not duplication of what has happened. It's using what you've heard, what you've seen, what you've read in one language to do something different in another language. And I think it has huge potential for teaching, because you're drawing on all the kind of languages that children have at home or are exposed to in the community, and using it in a very creative way. There's a higher, I'd say, cognitive kind of demand there to not just repeat in another language and translate it, but to use it in a very creative way. And then I think that it's just a bit more complex when it comes to minoritized languages. One of my colleagues in Bangor University who works with Welsh language, she's very interesting to read really any of her stuff, Aintley Thomas, and she wrote a handbook on translanguaging to support teachers in schools. So she wrote it in Welsh and then it was in English afterwards, and she gave it to me to translate so that we could have it in Irish. And I changed the Irish version a bit, like there are maybe 6 or 7 extra pages to take into account the socio-linguistic context, the reality of what teaching Irish or wanting to speak Irish outside the school looks like in Ireland. And one of the changes I made, and that we had like kind of a robust conversation about whether I could or couldn't do this, was that for on the principle of translanguaging, she had left certain quotes in English. And then, in the Welsh version, even the quotes are in English. And she said, well, this is translanguaging. They're reading in English, they're thinking about it, and they'll do the activity then in Welsh. And I said, well, actually, for me, I teach on an Irish medium programme, and there can be this mental block about people thinking that you can't use Irish in certain domains. And people often say, you can't lecture in psychology through Irish. And say, well, I do 3 times a week, and we do all of the modules through Irish. That at the heart of translanguaging is valorising and paying tribute to different speech communities' practices. But when you have that mental block that you weren't allowed to do certain things through Irish, that's a bridge that you need to cross first. So I thought really to allow people to fully use their linguistic repertoires and also to fully use Irish in different contexts, I wanted those, very academic pieces in Irish so that students could read them and communicate them. Because I've found over the last few years that giving somebody like a research article in English and then immediately asking them, now discuss that in your group in Irish, isn't very effective as a methodology. You really need very targeted teaching of the vocabulary and the kind of structures they need. So sometimes I find for the Irish language context, there's even a bridge before translanguaging.
I think as well, because Irish and English are so different. Like they're completely different, the way they're structured. It's nearly back to front, really. Irish, you know, what English is, Irish actually turns it upside down and turns it back to front as well. And I think even going back to what you were saying, Erica, as well, because I think the demographics of Irish classrooms are changing so quickly. It's such a rapid pace. You know, we're living in very dynamic times. But I think, you know, from working with children who are multilingualist, I think they are risk takers. They're very open-minded. They like to be challenged. They like to be critical in their thinking. They like to really know what they're learning, and they have a great capacity to take new information and to absorb it very quickly. I know this is anecdotal, but sometimes there is that eureka moment where you see a child who has many languages. They can just respond so much more creatively than maybe a child who's monolinguistic as well. So I've seen that in my practice as well, happening all the time. And I think economically, this is such a massive thing for us as a country as well, because I think, you know, taking different children from different backgrounds, different languages as well, I think this is part and parcel of placing multilingualism in a new light or a spotlight as well. I think for Ireland, I think this is a great thing. It's going to be absolutely wonderful, and not only for our own language. And I think, and we were speaking about that at coffee, we were saying I think this will elevate the Irish language. Even having all these different languages, I think we'll become a lot prouder of having our own language and not forgetting about it, because sometimes we do forget about it. But I think it'll just, you know, bring it to a whole new level. I think spotlighting it, our own language and other languages as well. Yeah.
And avoiding maybe some of the distinctions that are out there and exist between, you know, certain high status and low status languages, and there is no such thing as high status or low status in absolute terms. And I like this thing about, you know, you can actually study medicine or philosophize in Irish, and there's not just for, you know, a language for some local farmer to be speaking with his wife, and that it really is, as any language, you can actually study any subject. What I would like, there maybe just a little orange light that should be flashing there on our dashboards, is that we can't reduce language just like to form and make it into a tool. I think with each language comes you know, something which we call like pragmatics, very specific behavioral codes, and we may then detect like differences in the way a particular language and culture structure, for instance, handle politeness, face work, embarrassment. Also great differences across cultures and languages between what Ekman called display rules. We're all human, and we basically have very similar experiences, but we don't necessarily display our emotions, our thoughts in the same way. So that would also be interesting to see, you know, whether when you're like in, you know, Irish or being 100% French or English or whatever, what kind of changes in terms of what you display. Let me give you a very concrete example. For instance, moaning and negativity. Now, in British and I suppose in Irish culture, both English speaking and Irish speaking, it's pretty rude to be negative and moaning about things. In French culture, it's a way of bonding with other people. We moan about the same things, we complain about the same things, so we're in this together, we're close together, and it really is something very, very common. So, you know, these codes also have to be part of, at some point of, otherwise you detach the language, you just use it as form, which it does work. You can like forget about these codes and say, I simply need the language because I want to discuss this particular topic, so I switch from Irish to French to German, and that can be done. But, you know, if you want to reach a deeper level, you also have to, at some point in the way you use the language, or you teach, or you ask your students to reflect on how they use these languages at home. You'll be surprised at how differently, for instance, those again Amerindian girls who were so quiet, so silent. Clearly, silence is not used in the same way in their own culture, and same with, you know, loudness of voice, and all these really have an impact on the way people speak. And so, you know, language is there's a lot of coding. There's a lot of form in language, that's true, but there are also other things to be taken into consideration.
Thank you very much. I'd love to open the discussion to the audience. So if we have any questions or any comments, please raise your hand and we'll pass the microphone. The microphone, I should say.
Thank you so much. I think something that we see when we work with, say, primary school children or in the early years is that if we don't have an agenda of any kind, because we're not in a classroom, so we're we're creating a space that is not teacher-student relationship. Children naturally break into song and they sing in the language of their parents without having us prompting that, or they might want to tell you about themselves and teach you their language. I was wondering if you had examples from the work that you've done either on Irish or other languages where maybe this creative free space has brought surprise maybe, or has shown you something that you didn't expect, whether that's through theatrical practice or any other creative endeavor.
So I thought that was very interesting what you were saying about how you move abroad and you're exposed to lots of different languages. So I worked in Dubai for 7 years in an international school. We had children from all over the world, predominantly Arabic children. And obviously it was kind of a little bit of tension involved as well. So children were coming from maybe different backgrounds. There was a lot of strife in their backgrounds as well. But we also had children from South America. We had children from all over. They were everywhere. And I think that for me was the biggest challenge, because obviously English is the predominant language. There were British schools, but yet we had all these children coming into school at 3. So that was my challenge as a teacher, because music was my bag when I was over there. I was head of music. So we were trying all the time to really find what their language was and what they were comfortable in, and that they would be the mediators or they would be the teachers. And sometimes we get their parents to come in as well. And there was Farsi, there was Hindu, there was Arabic. And then I would try then and plan. Sometimes it worked well, sometimes not so well. And we'd try and then and plan a scheme of work around that. But you're really tapping into the children's autonomy, tapping into their agency, which is very in keeping with the 99 curriculum, the active agents of their own learning in Ireland, and then the 2025 curriculum that's coming out so now. But that really enabled them, and they felt a sense of ownership, felt of belonging when we were doing music in particular. And then obviously we'd get them to respond to music as well through dance, again through visual arts, trying to take that integrated artistic approach as well. And I think after a couple of weeks, I think, they felt a lot more at home. So yeah, that was my experience of working with children. I hope that might have answered your question a little bit, but just in the younger years, definitely that worked very, very well. Yeah.
Thanks a million. Yeah, I was kind of just inspired there, I guess, things that I wasn't expecting. But I was teaching in the Gaeltacht last year, and for those of you who aren't familiar with what the Gaeltacht is, there are areas in Ireland where Irish is spoken as the main language of the area. And in the summertime, parents might send their kids to the Gaeltacht for a period of time to learn Irish. So I was teaching in the Gaeltacht, and I was introduced to my class on the first day. And of course, it's very different from being in a post-primary school where you know the kids for so long, you've developed relationships with them, you know what their interests are, so you can kind of tailor your teaching, to them. But this group here, I didn't know them. They were all new, and there was very mixed attitudes, I suppose, towards the Irish language. And I was thinking, oh my God, how am I going to engage them? They're in this classroom with me for 2 or 3 hours a day, and the sun is shining outside. How can we really get these kids interested? And my main goal, I suppose, was to just get them speaking as much Irish as they can, and for them to have a positive experience. So I decided to bring games into the classroom. So is everybody familiar with Uno? Yeah, okay, great fun. I get very competitive, but it's great crack. And so with Uno, there's no kind of writing on the cards. So I was able to kind of scaffold the lesson. So I gave them all the language that they would need, and then I would let them off kind of playing it, going around to the different groups. And it was just a really simple task, but it was really effective. And the rule was that, and it's kind of interesting about the translanguaging, because I suppose I was a post-primary teacher for a number of years, and then I had the opportunity to go back to university and do a master's on Emmets in the Dachaslan Gaelga agus Gaeltachta, and I did it in Mary Immaculate College, and it was fantastic because I had this opportunity after kind of years of practice to engage with these things like translanguaging when initially, before I knew about it, I would have thought was a bad thing. You know, in post-primary, we want them to be speaking Irish all the time. But actually, I'm delighted that you said, you know, that there's kind of a cognitive, you know, that like if you can use the two, that you're kind of thinking, you know, more broadly and things like that. So, but the rule anyway was in the Gaeltacht that if they spoke English, they'd pick all the cards up in the middle. So nobody wanted to speak English, because the goal of the game is to get rid of all your cards. So that was really, really fun, and I saw that to be really effective. So then there's also Monopoly available in Irish. So I brought Monopoly, so they were all playing Monopoly, and Scrabble and Cluedo. So, you know, instead of having that classroom time, that was really a time where they really engaged in conversation with each other. But again, like I wasn't expecting, I suppose, them to be so positive when some people were quite negative at the start. So I was delighted, and the games are great crack. So yeah, it's good fun. But yeah, okay, Brilliant.
If I'm to think of an experience in the classroom recently, say that stood out for me for multilingualism, just before this experience, one of my close friends, and maybe you guys know her because I mentioned her name to you earlier on, she also is an interpreter, Mary Finnegan, and we were listening to some music, and I automatically started singing like these small children, you're saying, who spontaneously burst into song, but she started signing immediately, and it's that's brilliant. Could you come in and do something with my students? So she came in and taught them Stand By Me in sign. And it was brilliant and eye-opening for me, because so many students, even on day one of lectures, they'll come up and say, I'm not good at Irish, even though they got the highest marks in the country and, you know, are part of this concentrated bilingual community. They have this mental block that they're not good at Irish. So people who'd come up and self-identified as not being good at languages suddenly saw different languages aren't just verbal. And they were dancing and getting into it, and Mary was showing them, you know, about the amount of emotion you need to put into your signs for that song, if the water's moving fast, if you're, you know, very happy or very sad and things like that. And that was a big moment for me, that language is more than just the spoken word.
And I just might come back onto that, but just even the vulnerability of that as well, I think, which is so important, and building relationships with your children. And going back to my experience in Dubai, so I obviously had no Arabic, no Farsi, no Urdu. I had loads of Irish, loads of English. So, but I did try, and I really tried to see things from their point of view and the different cultural languages and the different backgrounds they had. And I think they loved that I was making the mistakes and that they were showing me. So again, that vulnerability piece that we talked about, that we're not perfect, that we're willing to make mistakes and we're on the journey with them. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, maybe that's a different topic, but that was mentioned this morning. You said, not this morning, a couple of hours ago, sorry, when you said, hold on to your mother tongue. I think that, to me, really matters an awful lot. And why I'm saying this is that I noticed, for instance, when I started, learning Portuguese, because I was often invited to Brazil, I knew many people of Portuguese extraction, because in the 70s in France, almost over 1 million Portuguese came and moved to France, especially to the southwest of France and Paris. And funnily, I found that people were reluctant to, teach me any Portuguese, speak the language. They would use the language when they returned back to Portugal to visit their cousins or grandparents. And in fact, they experienced French, English as high status, dominant, and to them, the Portuguese language was not so. It was the language that in a way, and the culture and the economy that had forced their parents to move to another country. And I thought, you're so lucky you speak that wonderfully beautiful and complex language just like that, and how much I envy you. But no, they didn't. They weren't even proud of being bilingual, multilingual. And I thought that was very, very sad. And I think this is one of our missions, to tell them, it's a treasure you have. It's wonderful. Don't be ashamed of anything, and who cares about who moved to where? Basically, it's. I think it's the same with friendship or love. Would you rather have just one rose in your garden, or 10 or 15 roses, and these are the languages you speak? That you don't be afraid of using that language, and that really is something. I think they're doing some very, very good work here in really encouraging people, of course, to speak their mother tongue at home, to be proud of it, and also to use the resource. In French, I will say this against English, is that unlike French, English has only one word for language. Now, in French, we have two. We have langage, which is like the general word for all languages spoken, and then langue, tongue, which is like for specific languages. Now, each and every single tongue you speak, language, of course, local language, in fact, connects to the general function, language function. So anyway, your mother tongue or your mother language basically has taught you something universal about language in general, about interactional codes, even if they differ from culture to culture. So it's always a help. So those that tell us, if we speak another language at home, that will, the child, it will be like an obstacle because there'll be less English, for instance, or French in the, no, they're still learning a lot about language in general. And that general understanding of language helps them, of course, with specific languages and makes them even better at them. So thank you for promoting that sort of attitude.
Thank you very much. I think do we have time for one final comment, question, observation from the floor?
Thank you. So my question is connected with the point Jean-Rémi just made. I spent 10 years working as a Montessori teacher in very multilingual classrooms, and my biggest challenge was parent awareness. So amongst teachers, we would all say, yes, it's wonderful to celebrate all of these languages, but then at home, the parents were saying English only, English only. So we had to do a lot of outreach work to explain to parents, yes, a bilingual child might take a little bit longer to speak because they're doing twice as much work, but that is not a bad thing. Your child is not, there's nothing wrong with your child because they're taking longer. And I think there's a lot of anxiety and stress for parents because we're working in education, so we know these things. So I'm curious, when you're training teachers, is that part of the training, like parent outreach, or are there any steps in place to raise parent awareness for what multilingual actually means practically for their own children?
And if I may, it would be really interesting to hear your views as well as Mother Tongue's view, because that's the main mission of Mother Tongues as well. But yeah, very interested to hear the answer to this in a nutshell, because it's almost 4 o'clock. But the last questions are always the best ones.
I suppose, the three of us are involved in teacher education. I think the first step is to let the students know that there are advantages to that's the first thing. And to understand that there are different types of bilinguals, so that they themselves can consider themselves bilinguals. As part of I suppose it's woven through different courses. Certainly in psychology, you'd be looking at cognitive, advantages of bilingualism. In English as an additional language, you'd be looking at the more socio-cultural kind of lens and the kind of advantages that people have, especially by being able to connect to their heritage, but also being part of a contemporary community of multilinguals. And then I think in parent awareness, there are certain resources and posters, for example, by Gaelichgus and COG, and it's about raising awareness of those kinds of resources that are available. Want to say anything?
Just from working with children, I think they are the risk takers. They are the ones that are willing to take, that extra step. And as you said, then maybe their parents are pulling them back. And sometimes it's the child educating the parent. And there's that interesting dynamic that normally it should be the parent that's doing the homework. And so, and now as a parent myself, I kind of see that as well. And my own little boy might struggle with languages as well. So I kind of see that from that point of view as well. So I do think there's a gap there. There definitely is a gap. And it's something that is a place that needs to be filled. But as you said, Claire, I think it comes through in a lot of different aspects of the courses that we teach. It's not one particular course that you'll talk about that. Obviously, the teacher can lead the process, can guide the process, but we can only do so much as well as teachers and as teacher educators as well. I do think it's a three-pronged approach with education. As we all know, it's the child, the teacher and the parent. So I think it's a work in progress. That's where I would see it from, the point of view I would see it from. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm conscious that earlier when I was talking about, say, the great things that are happening in Ireland in terms of the Irish language, that I was very Dublin's focused. But it's really important as well to look at, you know, the things that are happening around Ireland. And I suppose I can only speak from my own experience with the Irish language, but, you know, in various communities all around Ireland, we have language planners, and, you know, I suppose they are points of contact in terms of, you know, having supports in place for communities or people that want to raise their kids through Irish and things like that. And as Claire mentioned, COG are a fantastic organisation in Ireland, as are Gaeilge Dachas. There's another organisation, Tishmahori Le Gaeilge, Parents with Irish, and it's just tapping into those resources, and of course yourselves here. So yeah, that's kind of perfect. Okay.
Thank you very much. We could be here for hours. I'm sure it's always gets towards the end. It's so engaging. Francesca, would you like to address the last question? Would you like to say a few words? I have this urge to give you the floor, because I know you could say so much.
You can speak on behalf of parents, being a parent. Yeah. What does it feel like to be a parent of a bilingual child in Ireland? What would be your...
So my daughter is 5, and myself and my partner speak Italian to her, but she speaks English in her environment around her. And I think it's interesting. I think you asked because when she was 2, she was diagnosed with autism, or misdiagnosed with autism, because she was not speaking. And so the teachers were basically saying that because she was silent, she must be autistic, and you should get her checked. And the first thing I did is I picked up the phone and we had a very long conversation with yourself, Francesca, and also with Miriam, who was coming from a Montessori background. And I felt really vulnerable now to join all the dots as a parent, but also was very lucky to have a support in place in terms of a support network of professionals that could help me to understand the situation for a more distanced point of view. And I can't thank enough my colleagues who have helped me to realize the importance of allowing my daughter to take the time that she needed to then finally express herself. And obviously then, you know, we went through the assessments, and it came out that that particular teacher and that point of view was not necessarily aligned with what the situation was. Now, if she had been diagnosed with autism, there is nothing wrong, as we know, but it just, it was striking to see that there was that association that was coming so directly related between, you know, something that may be caused by being raised by a bilingual household. And I see around myself in the community where I am, I have seen a couple of parents that were in the same situation, and they were advised to go English only by professionals in the field. And it's difficult as a parent, as a citizen, but also as an academic, not to impose on choices. You know, you have to thread that fine line. You don't want to tell another parent how to parent, of course, but, you know, you just feel so it's really difficult you feel the burden of wanting to share with others in the community what the real deal is with multilingualism, but you also understand the struggle of a parent who's trying to do their best. So I think we're blessed to have a system in place through mother tongues and the other services that we have mentioned, where the children, like we've said this over and over, it's a bit of a leitmotif, the children are the real drive here. They realize they have a gift, and if we are able to help our children realize that vulnerability is a strength and not necessarily attached to shame, then this is a way forward. And, you know, we can't really impose things, but we can certainly try. I think there is hope out there. So with that, it's time to close. I would like to thank you so much for your attention, active attention in this panel. I would like to thank Mother Tongue for inviting us, the School of Education, Trinity College, and also Maynooth University, Bordeaux, Université Bordeaux-Montaigne, as well as Marino, of course, to come in. And I would like to thank the Arts Council for making all of this happen. And with that, I hope to see you in many workshops in the couple of days ahead. And thank you very much. And that's a wrap. Thank you.